The Cold War wasn't just a political standoff between the US and USSR. It was also a period of intense military innovation, especially in the development of rifles. It ushered in a new era of long-range weaponry and ultimately led to advancements and the creation of many modern rifles we see today. Military contractors and engineers were baking up all kinds of experimental wonders behind the scenes. Some of the models look like something straight out of a sci-fi classic, while others look like complete monstrosities. Back in the mid-20th century, when the world was still feeling the aftershocks of war and tech was booming, the U.S. Armory and Arsenal at Springfield, more commonly known as the Springfield Armory, not to be confused with today's Springfield Armory, kicked off all these crazy rifle projects. They were tasked to revolutionize the U.S. military's standard-issue rifles. The T-20 Garand was basically John Garand's dream version of the M1 if the ordnance folks hadn't insisted on its internal magazine. It had select fire capability, a hefty 20-round box mag, and was chambered in .30-06. They were really gearing up with this one. And if World War II had dragged into 1946, everyone would probably be talking about the T-20 instead of the M1. Around the same time, Remington launched their own take on a select-fire M1. They called it the T-22. It was a little different than the T-20 because it had a BAR-style magazine to greatly speed up reloads, critical factors in the heat of battle. As the dust of World War II settled, Earl Harvey stepped up with the experimental T-25 in 1945. Another select-fire M1, but chambered in the experimental T-65 cartridge, which was on its way to becoming the standardized 7.62 by 51 NATO. 5 years later, Harvey came up with the T-28, a roller-locking select-fire rifle also chambered for the same T-65. But it experienced a lot of slam fires, FTEs, breakage, and other issues. John Garand and Cyril A. Moore then collaborated with Earl Harvey, which led to the T-31, a bullpup chambered in T-65. Despite its intriguing design and relatively better maneuverability, the T-31 never made it past its prototype stage. The Clark Arms Company out of Boston, Mass. threw their hat in the ring with their T-33 series rifles for the U.S. Ordnance Department's lightweight rifle competition. They kicked off the T-33 development in March 1949. This select-fire rifle was designed to be lightweight, but it didn't perform well in tough conditions. Clark Arms dissolved 5 years later, but going back to Harvey's T-25, its journey continued with the T-35, and in October 1951 reached its last stop with the T-47, its final form. However, some problems in the earlier T-25 iterations persisted with the T-47, so everyone went back to the drawing board and gave the T-20 iterations another chance. Among those is the T-20E2, a T-20 with a longer receiver. It was converted to chamber the T-65 around 1949 and designated the T-36 and T-37 series. These would later become the T-44, which we now know as the M14. The story didn't quite end there. The T-48 rifle, an American adaptation of the Belgian FNFL, was also chambered for the T-65. It contended fiercely against the T-44 in trials. It proved capable, but ultimately fell short in the face of the T-44's refinements. Sometime in the early 1950s, the Brits developed the Enfield EM2, a bullpup rifle that their military very briefly adopted in 1951. It was ahead of its time with its magazine and chamber positioned behind the trigger. This bullpup configuration allowed for a shorter overall length while maintaining a full-length barrel, making the rifle more maneuverable without sacrificing accuracy. It was originally chambered for the .280 British cartridge with ballistics comparable to Russia's 7.62 by 39. Despite its innovative design and potential, the EM2's adoption was short-lived. The political landscape and the push for NATO standardization played significant roles in its demise. The British had hoped that the .280 British round would become the NATO standard. However, the United States preferred their more powerful T65/762 by 51. This disagreement culminated in NATO trials where various rifles, including the EM2, were tested against the T25 and T44 in a shoot-off. Although the EM2 was well regarded, the U.S. decision to standardize on the 7.62 by 51 round forced the British to reconsider their position. After the shoot-off, EM2 prototypes were built to chamber the 7.62 by 51 so the Brits could conform to NATO standards. But because these rifles were originally designed for a less powerful cartridge, they had all sorts of reliability issues with the 7.62 by 51. Next is the Armalite rifle, 10 developed in the late 1950s by Eugene Stoner. This battle rifle laid the foundation for an even more popular design, the AR-15. The AR-10 was initially chambered in 7.62 by 51, offering significant firepower with a lighter build compared to other rifles of its time. The AR-10 featured a groundbreaking design, incorporating lightweight materials like aluminum and fiberglass. Its direct impingement gas system was particularly notable, as it helped reduce weight and mitigate muzzle climb, allowing for better control during rapid fire. This system, combined with a rotating multi-lug bolt, set the stage for the rifle's superb performance. But even with all its advanced design elements, the AR-10 faced problems. During a torture test in 1957 at Springfield Armory, a composite barrel made of aluminum and steel burst, leading to its rejection in favor of the T-44. This setback didn't stop the AR-10's influence. It was later manufactured by Artillerie Inrichtingen in the Netherlands and saw action with various military forces worldwide, including in Sudan, Germany, Austria, Finland, Cuba, South Africa, and Portugal. Although it wasn't adopted as the U.S. military's primary rifle, the AR-10's legacy lived on. Its design principles were scaled down to create the AR-15, which eventually became the M16. The next experimental rifle on this list is the AR-18, introduced in 1963. This 5.56 rifle was the result of design improvements made by Arthur Miller and his team at Armalite over the AR-16 battle rifle, which was originally designed by Eugene Stoner to shoot 7.62 by 51. What made the AR-18 unique was its use of a short-stroke gas piston system, a big shift from the direct impingement system found in the AR-15/M16 system. This gas piston system significantly reduced fouling, making the AR-18 more reliable under certain conditions and, more importantly, allowed it to be fired with its stock folded. That can't be done with a stock AR-15. It was also built using stamped and welded steel components, rather than the more expensive and complex machined parts, which made it simpler and cheaper to produce. This made it particularly advantageous during the Cold War era, but even with these advantages, the AR-18 had difficulty gaining widespread adoption, because when it was released, the US military had already committed to the M16 during the Vietnam War. Nevertheless, the AR-18 found a niche among various military forces globally, and was notably used by the Irish Republican Army, where it earned the nickname the Widowmaker, as it allowed them to match and sometimes even outgun British forces. Don't confuse it with the Winchester 1911 shotgun though. While it didn't achieve commercial success, the AR-18's influence on subsequent firearm designs is undeniable. Its short-stroke gas piston system inspired many modern rifles such as the British SA-80, the German HKG-36, and the FN Scar. This next one isn't exactly a rifle, but we'll talk about it anyway, the Gyrojet rocket gun. It's a unique firearm developed by Robert Mainhart and Art Beal of MB Associates. Introduced in the mid-1960s, the Gyrojet fired rocket-propelled projectiles instead of bullets. It came in both pistol and carbine configurations, making it a weird and unconventional proposition during its time. Its rocket-propelled cartridges slightly resembled a .45 auto round but didn't work the same way. A typical firearm cartridge, regardless of its rimfire or centerfire, has a bullet seated in a brass or steel case that houses the gunpowder and primer. When a firearm's trigger is pulled, the bullet is pushed out of the gun's barrel by the exploding gunpowder while the empty case is pulled out by the extractor. The rocket projectile used by the Gyrojet was a single cartridge assembly that contained a primer and a piece of flash paper or cotton running the length of the hollow fuel grain. When the trigger is pulled, the rocket fuel is ignited, propelling the whole cartridge assembly. It was designed to accelerate as the rocket fuel burned, reaching a maximum velocity of around 1,250 feet per second at about 20 yards from the muzzle. This meant that the Gyrojet wasn't lethal at closer than 20 yards where the projectile had not yet reached its optimal speed. So while it looked cool on paper, and even on slow-mo too, there was no way it would work. The Gyrojet was tested in combat by the U.S. Military Studies and Observation Group during the Vietnam War. However, due to its poor accuracy, low initial velocity, and lethality issues, it did not secure a military contract. The H&K G11 is a weird-looking but groundbreaking design that started development in the late 1960s. It was noted for its use of caseless ammunition, which was a revolutionary concept at the time. Instead of traditional brass cartridges, the G11 fired 473 by 33 caseless rounds, which consisted of a solid propellant block with the bullet embedded within it. This design eliminated the need for cartridge ejection, making the rifle lighter and simpler to operate. The G11's ammunition allowed soldiers to carry more rounds due to the reduced weight and bulk of the caseless design. The rifle featured a rotating breech mechanism that aligned the round with the barrel, fired it, and then reset for the next shot. The G11 could fire in single shots, full auto, and a unique 3-round burst mode at a jaw-dropping rate of 2,000 rounds per minute. This burst mode supposedly increased the probability of bullets hitting the target by minimizing recoil between shots, ensuring that all 3 rounds would hit close to the same point. But that high rate of fire would prove to be the design's Achilles heel, as it generated substantial heat, initially leading to cook-off problems where rounds could spontaneously ignite in the hot chamber. This issue was mitigated by developing a high ignition temperature propellant, which required a much higher temperature to ignite. But that solution led to new problems, including increased wear on the rifle's components and further complications in manufacturing. Although the G11 performed well in trials, including the U.S. Army's ACR program, it never saw widespread adoption. The end of the Cold War and budgetary constraints led to the cancellation of the G11 project. And speaking of the ACR program, it was in the late 80s when the U.S. military launched the Advanced Combat Rifle program. The goal was to find a successor to the M16 and its improved versions. The military wanted a rifle that would offer a much higher first hit probability. This program tested 4 different rifle designs, and we've already covered one of them, the G11. So let's now shift our focus to the AAI ACR. The AAI ACR was a notable contender, featuring a flechette firing mechanism. Chambered for a Saboted 5.56 by 45mm cartridge, it fired tiny dart-like projectiles called flechettes, and were so designed to reduce recoil, supposedly to increase hit probability through its high velocity, that could reach 4,600 feet per second thereabouts. The AI ACR had a 3-round burst mode made possible by its triple-chamber breech unit for the fastest possible follow-up shots. But using flechettes proved problematic due to a number of factors, chief among which is its blinding muzzle blast and loud noise. Those could be mitigated somewhat by using a flash hider sound suppressor combo. But compatibility issues with standard 5.56 by 45 cartridges posed risks, so it had to use proprietary magazines to avoid loading the wrong ammo. And as well know, proprietary ain't cheap. The Colt ACR took a different approach with its duplex gimmick. It's essentially a single cartridge with 2 rounds, not too different from bolo shells, except the rounds aren't wired to each other. These would supposedly increase hit probability with each trigger pull. The problem was it made it more complex to design the ammo, and ultimately it resulted in a heavier recoil. Unlike its rivals, the Colt ACR didn't look like a sci-fi firearm. It retained its traditional appearance with its detachable box mag and iron sights, which made it familiar to users, but the duplex ammo did not provide the advantages had Colt hoped for in the trials, so it was rejected. And last but not least is the Steyr ACR, another fascinating experimental weapon. It utilized proprietary 5.56 caseless rounds that didn't require traditional brass casings, which saved ammo weight and allowed for a higher rate of fire. The design also included a unique straight pull bolt and an alien-esque aesthetic. However, like the G11, its caseless ammo could cause the rounds to cook off unexpectedly, so like its competitors, it failed to meet the program's requirements. The ACR program ultimately did not result in a new standard issue rifle for the US military, and turned out to be a big waste of taxpayer dollars. Let's now discuss the US Army's Objective Individual Combat Weapon Program, or OICW, which started in December 1993. It envisioned a lightweight, shoulder-fired weapon system with dual munitions capability and advanced day-night fire control to provide substantial upgrades in lethality over the standard issue M16 and M203 combo. The OICW's most prominent prototype was the XM29, developed by Alliant Tech Systems and Heckler & Koch. The XM29 combined a 5.56 by 45 automatic carbine with a 6-round semi-automatic grenade launcher that fired smart grenades. An undisclosed number of these XM29S were built by Alliant Tech Systems and H and K for the US military. The grenade launcher component used a high-tech ballistic computer and a rangefinder to program the grenades to airburst at specific points, effectively targeting enemies behind cover or at extended ranges. This part of the weapon worked well, but the rifle part, because it had a short barrel length of 9.8 inches, just didn't have enough room to push a 5.56 bullet, reducing its effectiveness as a standard infantry weapon. For all the progress they've made, the XM29 failed to impress the authorities, so the program was canceled in October 2004. The grenade launcher was cutting edge for its time, but it was pricey and had too many alternative ammo options to be practical for large-scale use. Ultimately, the XM29 was never a serious contender to replace the trusty M16 series. The OICW project, much like the ACR before it, turned out to be another waste of taxpayer dollars. The program eventually split into 3 phases: OICW increments 1, 2, and 3. This led to the creation of the now canceled Heckler & Koch XM8 assault rifle prototype and the Heckler & Koch XM2525mm grenade launcher. While the XM8 was discontinued in October 2005, the XM25 has been in development and saw some use by US frontline forces in Afghanistan starting in 2010. And those are all the US rifle projects of the Cold War era. From the ambitious T-Series to the innovative but flawed OICW, each reflects a fascinating, albeit sometimes head-scratching, chapter in military history. If you found this video entertaining or intriguing at least, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more of these types of content. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.